Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Josh Guerrero, and I'm the host and founder of this podcast, which is simply titled The All Around Adventure Podcast. Whether you're joining me for the first time or if you've been listening for a while now, I certainly do want to welcome you here. And as always, I want to thank you for being here today. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on, and there's also a lot out there on the internet these days that's trying to get your attention and distract you. But it just means the world to me that you've chosen to download and listen to this podcast. Now, if you are in fact new to this podcast and you're not entirely sure what we're all about here, this is the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. And those will be travel stories from myself, as well as the amazing guests that I welcome on this podcast. And I'm talking with travelers of all kinds on this podcast. I'm talking with warriors, entrepreneurs, digital nomads, best-selling authors, bloggers, adventurers, philanthropists, you name it. If they have a fantastic travel story to tell with some great life lessons to share, it's been my job to seek them out and bring them on this podcast and extract these stories and life lessons through powerful conversations to help you level up in your life. And that's, of course, done on my regular show, but I also have another show that you just so happen to be listening to right now, and this is called The Blog Readings, or TBR for short, and it's exactly how it sounds, where I read my blog posts, both past and present, for you to have an audio format on the go. However, this segment of the blog readings is going to be a little bit different since I won't actually be reading one of my own blog posts today. But what I am going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing an episode from another podcast that I was a part of. Recently, I was welcomed to be a guest on the Joe Health Show podcast with host Jonathan Geiman. And this was a fun interview for me because I got to talk a little bit about my own travel experiences from my time in the Peace Corps as well as my time in the military as a Marine. And I also got to talk a little bit about health and wellness, where I shared my decision to quit drinking alcohol nearly 10 years ago and just some of the benefits that I've gained from doing so. And, that's really all I have to say about that for now. I'll just kind of let the rest of the episode play and you can kind of hear it for yourself. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into this. And this is my interview on the Joe Health Show podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Joe Health Show. I have, I'll just kind of go back in time a little bit. Whenever I was at the podcast movement this year in Orlando, Florida, I met a couple people. One of those peoples is Josh Guerrero. He's joining me today. How are you doing?
And doing good, John. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, no, it's great because when we met, I believe it was at the Tin Roof Orlando for iHeartRadio's Bash, and there wasn't a lot of talking. It was more like screaming back and forth at people, right?
Yeah, definitely. I almost didn't go to that party because I was feeling a little bit tuckered out with just like the whole day's events and breakout sessions, but I'm really glad that I went because I found several other opportunities when it comes to podcasting, not just with you and I talking right now. But yeah, you're absolutely right because it was definitely more a shouting match. I think my voice was a little bit off the next day.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was a lot of fun. That whole week was a lot of fun and meeting a lot of people, but you're the first one of all the people I've connected with to have a chance to talk to. And, we connected on Facebook and you had said something the other day that piqued my interest. And we're going to talk about that in the podcast today. But Josh, why don't you start by telling my listeners a little bit about your podcast? You're Big Into Adventure, the All Around Adventure podcast, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, why don't you give us like a 2-minute commercial for what your show is, what you like to do, and maybe what gave you we'll get into what gave you the desire to start that show, but what is your show?
Well, my show is, like you said, it's called the All Around Adventure Podcast. Now, the name All Around Adventure has kind of seen a little bit of an evolution since I started it. When I started it back in 2016, it was really just a personal blog back then, kind of just sort of showcasing my travels and my experiences thus far. I had lived in West Africa for 2 years when I was in Peace Corps. And at the time when I started the blog, I was living in England as a grad student studying archaeology. But eventually it's just when I felt like I wanted to grow it more than what it was, it's just I wasn't really providing a whole lot of value just talking about myself. Well, maybe to some degree I was, but I wasn't really quite. That wasn't the objective at the time, if that makes sense. So I kind of sort of revamp things a little bit, and the name kind of has like a little bit of an involved meaning now. Initially, the term all-around adventure was sort of reflecting my versatility as a traveler. Obviously, as I've mentioned, I lived in a rural village in West Africa for 2 years, and I've got to ride camels in the Sahara Desert, so I'm really good out in the wild. But you drop me in New York City and drop me in London, and I can keep up with the hustle and bustle just fine. So I've always kind of, I guess I'd say, took pride in being a very versatile traveler. But again, making this shift to try to be more valuable and to add value into other people's lives is I started to incorporate more of a self-development theme to it as well. And that's kind of why I started getting into the podcasting side of my blog. And it became about trying to help others, because I just come to find that just all these amazing travel experiences that I've had up until this point, I just gained so many valuable life lessons. And then I was interacting with other travelers who were experiencing the exact same thing. So I started bringing them on the podcast, trying to extract their stories and their life lessons. And so now kind of the whole idea behind All Around Adventure is kind of, as the name implies, is to help people become all around better versions of themselves through the stories that I share on the podcast from myself and my guests, and the life lessons that we try to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great, because you're right. Not everybody's going to be traveling, but the opportunities you experience, everything about that, you have something to give back to people and teach them, and they can apply that in their own lives, whatever the adventure is. I think that's phenomenal. And I have listened to a few of Josh's podcasts recently, and I'm going to tell you, man, your audio is on point. So I hope that I can keep up. And but your audio is on point, man. I think that's something that I value in podcasts, is a pleasurable listening experience, and you certainly have that with yours. But as far as you, though, like, where did you come from? Like, can you give us a 3 to 5 minutes on your backstory and what maybe is the driver behind your zeal for this adventure lifestyle?
Sure, yeah. Well, surprisingly enough, I'm actually sort of a late bloomer when it comes to the adventure and world travel side of my life. I actually didn't do my first international travel experience until I was 25 years old, and I'm 33 now. And of course, I've been to like Canada, but I'm from Michigan originally. It's just right across the bridge. I don't really count that as an international experience. But I was, it's just, for a good while, though, it's just a lot of that stuff didn't really interest me. Like, I had joined the Marine Corps right out of high school back when I was 18. But even then, I wasn't really so much of an adventurous spirit. I think more of like that decision was for kind of a sense of duty, kind of coming off of 9/11. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later on in this conversation. Mm-hmm. But it ultimately just led to me just doing it one time. And, like how many great experiences that you have, they kind of, create this spark within you to go seek out more similar great experiences as well. And my first trip was to Japan. I was going for my undergrad, just about to graduate, and there was a professor who was doing a 2-week study abroad to Japan. And I've always been fascinated by the country. I was a little bit of an anime buff growing up, and to a degree I still am. I used to watch like Dragon Ball Z and all of those like Toonami shows back when I was younger. And then of course the culture, the history, and then I'm also a martial artist. So hearing stories about the samurai and the ninja always piqued my interest. So I definitely really capitalized on the opportunity to go to Japan. And that's what got me bit with the travel bug. And then coming back from that trip, I just had an amazing time, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I get more of this? Like, where else can I go to where I can have those same kind of experiences? And then I was an elementary education major, and I was close to graduating at this point when I had come back from Japan. And at the time, the job market for teachers in Michigan was it was awful. It was just downright terrible. Like, they were actually starting to close down schools. They were letting teachers go left and right. So they had far more licensed teachers in the state than they had like jobs for everybody. So I started thinking to myself, well, I guess, what am I supposed to do now then? Obviously, I can't be unemployed. And then one thing led to another, thinking about this adventurous spirit that I just cultivated, and I ended up choosing the Peace Corps. I mean, there's certainly a much more in-depth story to that, but long story short, I chose Peace Corps, and I ended up living in the Gambia and West Africa for 2 years as a teacher trainer. since I was an elementary education major, nice. It fit perfectly, and they were looking for education volunteers in that part of the world. And again, it was just having that experience led to me eventually living in England, visiting some other places, and also leading to me just traveling around quite a bit now as an archaeologist. So yeah, you can just say that it just started with just one thing, and then one thing, just kind of lets you get that taste for something amazing, and then you just try to see where you can get more of it.
Wow, that's amazing. What you've been able to experience so far is truly something that I would imagine the stories that come from that we could put together probably several podcasts. In fact, you did create your own podcast around your adventures. So much to get to, but you did mention that after 9/11, you felt that compelling to come, to join the service. I'm interested into more like what you experienced, what you felt, on the inside with that. Obviously, pretty much anybody listening to podcasts probably knows what 9/11 is and what happened on that day. But what was it that moved inside of you that made you want to serve with our country?
Well, at the time when I was in high school, I was a sophomore in high school, by the way, when 9/11 had happened. And it was around that time, getting halfway through high school, the thoughts of what I might want to do afterwards, were sort of kind of starting to come to mind a little bit. I mean, it wasn't so prevalent as compared to my senior year, obviously, but it was on my mind. And the military at that point had sort of piqued my interest. And I had learned a little bit about it as far as some of the benefits that I would gain from it, pertaining to things like college and things like that. And of course, I was smart enough to probably go to college on my own if I so wanted to. But I remember my sophomore year walking into history class, and the wall-mounted TV was on, which was really unusual because, it's never on when we just walk right in at the beginning of the class. And we didn't even really watch movies a whole lot or use the TV very much in that classroom to begin with. But it was on this time, and I remember seeing that the first tower was on fire. And I was kind of sort of confused as to what exactly was going on because, kind of just like growing up, I've never seen what like an act or a declaration of war would look like in any way, shape, or form. But then seeing that and then coming to the realization what was going on, at that point, the decision was pretty clear. It's like, yep, I'm joining the military. And then I chose the Marine Corps because they got the reputation of being the toughest branch that we have. And I enlisted actually during my junior year. And I was in a 1-year delayed entry program where I spent like my senior year kind of just doing certain things with other Marines to get ready for boot camp and to be successful in boot camp. And yeah, so like I said, it was an easy choice at that point to really join the military.
That is something that day, seeing that, I remember exactly where I was out of high school, but you were talking about, being in high school and seeing that on TV. And it reminds me of whenever I was in middle school, the one event that they had on the TVs when I was in middle school was O.J. Simpson being chased down the highway in his Ford Bronco. That's what we were all watching when I was in middle school. But yeah, as far as 9/11, I know exactly where I was. And I think that's a really honorable thing that you did and obviously decided to do that opened up the door to a lot of, a life of adventure too after that. So moving on, what drives you to continue? Obviously, your podcast, All Around Adventure, is about becoming better and is about taking these life experiences from travel. What drives you to continue becoming better?
Well, there's definitely a lot of answers to that question, but kind of like looking at when you sent me the questions and looking at that, I guess one thing that I guess quickly sort of came to mind, I guess, just sort of off the top of my head, was that it certainly beats the alternative. Because I've experienced the alternative and quite frankly, I felt horrible. Like, I've, had like points in my life where, I have been, very low and kind of just sort of circling back a little bit to my Marine Corps experience. I don't tell this story very often, but I, feel like I should because, I think there's value in it. But like, I remember I got really complacent in my service and I let myself get really out of shape, and I became what the Marine Corps refers to as a fat body. It's just, I was just really out of shape. I was very unbecoming of a Marine in that state. And I had to get put on what's called a body composition program. And basically I had Marines that were assigned to me that had to come out like in the very early mornings before the sun came up to run with me, to work out with me, and more or less hold me accountable to make sure that I did it. And I just remembered kind of going through that whole program and just really feeling like pretty bad about myself because, you know, here I am, these Marines, they got to get up like before dawn to come work out with me. Probably, you know, they could have been spending that time, you know, maybe getting their kids ready or doing stuff for themselves. But instead they had to come out and help me because I couldn't, you know, help myself. And also just I had also a really tough realization, you know, after thinking about that. And I'm thinking to myself that, you know, if I'm out in the battlefield right now and I saw a wounded Marine, I don't think I'd be able to carry him off. I mean, I don't think, like physically, I don't think I would have been able to do it. And I also thought about like, if we had to like run away and I'm falling behind because I can't keep up, or if someone has to carry me and I'm too heavy to carry, you know, it's just, I could get Marines killed. And that was a really, really tough realization. So I knew then that I had to turn it around. And then, you know, one thing led to another. And then less than a year later, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. And so,
nice.
So basically it's just thinking about just like times like that in my life where, you know, I wasn't strong. I wasn't the best I could be. And, you know, quite frankly, I was a liability to others and I wanted to be an asset. And so I think that kind of is sort of what continues to drive me now is because, you know, I've been there. You know, I felt what it's like to, you know, be complacent, to not live up to my full potential and to be a liability. And, you know, quite frankly, you know, it feels horrible. So it's just, so obviously, you know, me continuing to get better, it's certainly a lot better than that. And then also just not only am I bettering myself, but I can put myself in a better state to better serve others, whether it's just, you know, people in my life, you know, my friends, family, colleagues, you know, I'm single right now, but someday, you know, when I have a girlfriend, you know, to make sure I could, you know, serve her better too. And then also obviously to be of better service to my audience and obviously maybe even the listeners of this show as well, you know, who are, you know, who are tuning in to hear what we have to say today. You know, it just allows me to show up so much better for myself and for others, you know, when I continue to work towards being better.
I definitely agree. And it's not something to be ashamed of if we ever find ourselves in that really low place in life, struggling with whether it's, you know, depression, mental illness, just upset with our circumstance, with ourselves. And it's good to surround yourself with people that will help you and will walk with you and get you through that. And then to also encourage you to be better. And I like that you didn't give up in those moments and you continue to push. That's something I constantly have to keep reminding myself, just get a little bit better, just 1% better every day.
Yeah, definitely.
And just keep moving forward.
Yeah. You know, and I always say that like, now, back then, you know, I wouldn't say that a lot of it was negative self-talk. I mean, to a degree, you have to be real with yourself if you recognize that there's something in your life that you feel like you need to change. Like if you're overweight, you know, just say it. You know, I'm overweight.
Right.
But always follow it up with like, but I don't have to be. You know, I could change this.
Right.
You know, that's one of the great things about us human beings is that we have like the ability to willingly instill changes within ourselves at will. And, you know, whether that's like, again, we're using this example of fitness here is that, you know, if we don't like how we feel physically, well, we could change that. We could, you know, we can adjust our diet. We could adjust our fitness routine. You know, there's a lot of other like hacks. We could walk more. You know, it's just, that's kind of the cool thing about us humans is that, you know, we're one of the few species on this planet that has the ability to change ourselves at will. So definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it's not helpful either to beat yourself up knowing that like, well, I could have, I let myself get here. Well, that's okay. You know, you can change. I love that. I love that message. So moving forward in our conversation here, obviously with traveling, with adventure, I'm coming from a place where I'm married, I've got 2 kids, they're 5 and 7 years old. And sometimes there's this longing that maybe I missed an opportunity to go travel different places or do certain things. And I feel like I've missed out all the while living this other adventure of a family. And it absolutely is an adventure. But for maybe somebody in my situation where feeling like there's this longing to go out and do something, do you have any like words of advice to those people that want that adventure, but maybe life has them in a place where they've just got to be patient for a couple years, some like maybe some little mini adventures they could do?
Right, definitely. It's always kind of funny. Now, obviously, I'm certainly not going to be one to give parenting advice to anyone right now, especially since, I'm not a parent of myself, but
everybody else does. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. I mean, but I've certainly had my fair share of conversations with like other parents who are kind of living that more traveling lifestyle. And it could be a little bit tricky because especially like you said that, your kids are 5 and 7. So at this point, they're probably got their circle of friends at school and, teachers that they like. And, you all have like your systems, routines, within the house and things like that. So it certainly would be pretty difficult to just, let's say, give all that up and go live a nomad lifestyle. I mean, there's obviously some families where, like going back to me being in the military where, a lot of Marines that I've interacted with, they will have family with kids and they've been to like 4 different duty stations in the past several years. But, that's just the norm for them. That's just what the kids have always known. Right. But certainly a little bit tricky for, other families who have kind of been stationary for a good while. But I always kind of like to say that, you talk about the adventure of having a family versus, the adventure of going out there and experiencing the world. Like, I don't believe that the two are mutually exclusive. It's just, I don't think you really have to just say you're just going to choose one and totally neglect the other. I kind of say that the two can be very good dance partners. And, especially if you have a family, if you just kind of think about the value that kids can gain if they're going around and traveling, seeing things like for themselves, experiencing things firsthand. Maybe it's different cultures, different landscapes, and just what you can kind of take from moments like that to try to teach them. I've heard of amazing stories about like families who like would have like 2 kids and they would literally take them sailing around the world and for like an entire year, and they come back into their regular public schools back in the States and they're like leaps and bounds ahead of their peers just because they had that real world of experience of, seeing different cultures and, just learning things in a more real world, I guess, practical sense, while at the same time being homeschooled by their parents, of course. So I don't think it's one of those situations where you have one, you can only have one and totally neglect the other. You can certainly have both, but it really kind of comes to like a willingness to really try to, make that happen. And I always suggest that, if you have kids that you want that are interested in that too, maybe even get them involved. Get them involved with like the planning process. Like here, stateside, for instance, it's just, I didn't realize it before, but there is just a plethora of national parks and national historical sites all up and down the East Coast here that I didn't even know about before. And go into each one of them. And even now, I mean, like I said, I'm 33. I'm still learning just a fair amount about like my own nation's history, just because a lot of these places I never experienced before. A lot of them are just within like a day's drive. And maybe like that's all it takes to really get started is just, plan something for like a weekend. It doesn't have to be like a huge, elaborate, drawn out trip to some exotic location right off the bat. You can always kind of start like a little bit small, as most journeys usually tend to do. And maybe that could be just as simple as driving the next town over and taking your kids to maybe like, let's say like an ethnic food restaurant that you all never tried before, just to see what the experience is like. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. It's just ultimately, I think it kind of, I notice that a lot of parents sort of have this sort of self-limiting belief that, maybe they can't do something like that when they start a family. And maybe it comes from their parents too. Like, I don't know. Well, they'll say like, well, once you get like, I'm sure maybe you've probably even heard, I know I've heard quite a bit too, is that, get out and travel, experience the world, because once you get married and have kids, the only place you're going to is Chuck E. Cheese, right? But, but I'm like, well, I guess, yeah, if you say that and that's what you truly believe, then yeah, that's all you're going to be going to is Chuck E. Cheese. That's going to be your Paris, your Italy, your South America or whatever. But, it just really boils down to, you just kind of got to want to do it. And then you got to encourage your kids to get involved too, see where they want to go, get them involved in the planning. And, again, start small if you need to with just, maybe close trips nearby, or maybe get them to learn more about their own local community, or get them out in nature up for a day hike or a bike ride. There's just, the possibilities are really endless. I mean, ultimately it's going to be up to the families to decide what it is that they're going to want to do with their kids. But there's just so many different ways, and it just becomes really a matter of just trying to look for them and having the willingness to look for them too.
Oh man, that's packed full of excellent advice, especially for, when I think about my time with when the kids were younger, when they were, less than a year old and just over a 2-year-old, when they were at, their youngest. Like, our adventure was going to Target. I was getting out of the house, but what you said, so I know what it's like for parents too to feel so trapped. But then as the kids get a little older, I think you nailed it with just doing those little mini adventures. Go on a day trip somewhere, or go to the next town over and visit that, that ethnic restaurant that's not, McDonald's or whatever it is. Dude, just so much good stuff, and I even just getting out in the woods. One of my favorite things to do is find a creek or a stream and like build a dam, and you can start learning like how the water moves and what you can do to manipulate that and just experience that. I think all of that adds to that total adventure package.
Absolutely.
So moving on, you made a post on social media the other day that really intrigued me, and that really what I wanted to reach out and talk about today. And realizing, though, there's so many things we could talk about, but oftentimes in this space that I speak to with health and wellness and, living like a keto or paleo lifestyle, people often ask about alcohol and how, when can I drink my alcohol, and that, because it's not necessarily a good thing for you. It's a poison. Our body really doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't really give us many advantages whatsoever. But you had posted that you haven't had a drink in 10 years. And I was really, it really struck me because at this time in my life, I'm really noticing the negative. I mean, I've always noticed the negative effects of alcohol. But I'm really starting to notice more that after effects, not just how it makes you feel in the moment, but then the day after and the day after that, how it affects your brain and how you think about yourself. And it's just been on my mind a whole lot lately. And I think to myself, like, why even have a drink? Like, why even do it? And then you posted that, and I was like, boy, that would make a great conversation. So could you elaborate a little bit more on maybe what led to that decision 10 years ago? And then kind of why you're continuing that, and then we'll open it up a little bit.
Sure thing. Yeah. Well, I can actually go back to the actual day when I had my last drink and the circumstances around it, and it was October 30th of 2009. So yeah, so we are talking about a good decade ago. This is back when I used to do mixed martial arts, and some of the other fighters on my team, they had a couple of fights that night. They were very successful, and we had an after party. And I remember we went to this bar nearby, and I ordered a Corona. And I'm not sure what came over me in that moment, but I actually was about halfway through that beer, and I looked at it and I said, you know what? This is going to be my last beer ever. And I finished it, and I didn't order another one. And then as the days, went on, I kind of pondered, what I had said a little bit. And again, I can't even really fully put myself in that moment as to why I, made that, said that out loud. But I, obviously started thinking about it. And, I just kind of thought about what alcohol has sort of been like in my life up until that point. Kind of going back to my Marine Corps service. I was 19 years old when I first linked up with my unit that I was assigned to. And I was only there for maybe about 2 months. And then we had a 3-month detachment, is what we call it, where my entire unit went out to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Now, for anyone who doesn't know where Nellis is, it's in Las Vegas. All right. So you have a whole squadron of Marines in Las Vegas, bored out of their minds with per diem. So I'm not going to name any names, but let's just say that I didn't really have very good role models as a young 19-year-old on, responsible alcohol usage. We'll just put it that way.
Right.
So I guess so I didn't really kind of just even like right back then, I just really didn't really seem all that appealing to me, just because I just kind of seen like, yeah, like a lot of these guys were just, having to be carried out of bars, and, they were kind of just being just a big problem and an inconvenience, and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to do that or anything, and then I just kind of observed like other things too. Like I was at like another bar back in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where I was stationed. And, there was this man who was, clearly intoxicated, and his wife or his girlfriend had to literally, bring his arm over her shoulders, and she had to like walk him out of there. And I'm like, man, why does he have to embarrass and burden his wife or girlfriend that way? So needless to say, I just didn't see a lot of it. And I think that's one of the big contributing factors as to why I continue to stay off of alcohol. And, I'm not going to obviously say that, and I'll just kind of caveat with this before I continue on, that obviously I'm no way sharing or saying that, there's anything wrong with anyone who does drink alcohol. I mean, I obviously know a lot of people who do. It's just certain things that I've observed that led to this decision. And it was just, going back to when I was really overweight in the military and how I felt like I was a liability, I was worried that maybe if I were to continue to keep on drinking, that could ultimately turn into another thing that could turn me into a liability. Like, what if like a friend or a family member called me up one night and needed my help, and I was like, too drunk out of my mind to, respond intelligently, and then, they end up getting hurt or something, or maybe even worse, And so I always will say that, if someone called me up tonight and they needed my help, I may not have like the right answers. I may not know entirely what to do, but they can definitely be reassured that I'm going to be sober enough to listen, Right. And, that also just kind of thinks about just, and then what I think it kind of sort of just means to be just like me, again, leading into the future and being able to serve others. I mean, obviously one of my goals is to be, a husband someday, and obviously to be of better service and to be there in a more supportive way and fulfilling the obligations in the relationship, with my girlfriend, my wife, or whomever. I mean, obviously I can't do that if I'm drunk, So I think there's a lot of like that is the reason why I stopped. And then of course there was, again, like the health side of it too. It's just, I have had moments where I got like really, really drunk and, just waking up the next morning with just this splitting headache. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't fun. It's like, I feel horrible. It's just like the events of last night of drinking as much as I did was really not worth, the reward of, waking up and feeling like this. And then also just, it saves a lot of money too. If you want to get fiscal with it, is just, especially as a world traveler, it's kind of nice that I'm able to not have to put a dent in my travel budget, with drinks, so there's a lot of reasons for it. But I think ultimately it's just, how I want to show up in my life is just, alcohol just simply just doesn't provide any value for me, and then now right. at this point, 10 years later, it's just part of my character. It's just as much as me being, as I am a podcaster, as I'm an archaeologist, as I'm, this or that, it's just like, hi, I'm Josh Guerrero and I don't drink alcohol. It's just who I am now.
Right. It's one of those things. Yeah. As you're talking about that, like all of that makes sense to me because there's no need to drink alcohol. It's purely for, well, some people will use it as an unhealthy coping mechanism, obviously to escape. But otherwise it's just strictly enjoyment or pleasure, so there's no need or requirement. And in today's world, obviously there's booze everywhere. Almost anywhere you go, like beer, wine, liquor is part of life. So, I can't imagine it's easy all the time, or especially whenever you first made the decision to kind of live that lifestyle without feeling like, without having other people feel like, oh, he's judging me for drinking alcohol because he's not, which I know you're not. It doesn't sound like you are at all. But it's almost really hard. It's like someone who starts a diet and doesn't eat pizza anymore or doesn't eat cake anymore and then shows up to a picnic where they're all eating pizza and cake and they're like, yeah, no thanks. I'm trying to stay healthy. It's like automatically implying that what the other people are doing is not good for you. So like, how do you navigate some of those social situations? And if any of what I just said, like, makes sense, if you felt any of that or experienced or thought you may have, like, what do you do in social situations or even when you're traveling with different customary things to stay true to, your commitment there?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's just, especially when I got out of the Marine Corps and I, just started going to college and everything like that. It was actually when shortly after I started college when I made the decision to stop drinking. But then, I started making more friends and I would go out with them. And that's exactly the response I got, where it's, they'll say like, hey, what are you having to drink? I'm like, oh, I don't drink. I'll just get myself like a ginger ale or something like that. And they're like, oh, what are you judging us now? Because we're all drinking? I'm like, hey, those are your words, not mine.
Right? Yes. You said it, not me.
Yeah, it's like, so I had no judgment for them. And for other people, it could be even harder, especially if, let's say, drinking, has been a part of their life for a good while now, to the point where like their friends and those within their circle or their tribe kind of come to, know them as someone who drinks. And then suddenly they make this pretty much a paradigm shift to say, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. And then, they're going to get a lot of questions and maybe even a little bit of pushback from, their tribe saying, well, you always drink with us, when you come out on Friday night. How come you're not drinking now? And I'd say overall, though, is just that if you are with like the right tribe and the right group of people, they're not going to really make a big deal about you wanting to better yourself. I mean, I've always kind of come to find that, if people will criticize you because you do want to make a change in your life, especially a change that you're looking to do to improve yourself and, to make yourself better. I think a lot of it might come from envy to a degree because, and I think maybe to some degree also a little bit of guilt too, where those who would criticize you for making those changes and not just wanting to make the changes, but actually taking actionable steps to make those changes in your life. They might see it in themselves that they think they might need to do it too, but they just might not be willing to put in the work like you are. So it's pretty hard, to, kind of trying to interact with like those relationships and those people that you have in your circle that, will kind of criticize you for. I always kind of find it a little bit strange that anyone would want to criticize someone who wants to better themselves. But, here we are. But yeah, it certainly has made it pretty challenging. And, kind of going back to the other part of your question about traveling too, is that, I've been to like other places where alcohol is, a pretty regular thing, especially when I was living in the UK and, just kind of going, pubs are a pretty big thing there. And then just maybe going out with a group of grad school friends. And then I guess maybe at this point it was a little bit easier this time around. I didn't really have to do too much convincing because, it was just like they didn't know at the time if I was a drinker or not. And then once I just made it a point that I wasn't, then, that was pretty much the end of that conversation. And who knows, maybe that would just be the same. What someone else would need too is that if, they're looking to make those kind of changes in their lives is to, see who they can connect with that might be making similar strides or who are also on what I refer to as the path to better yourself. It's just, I think you'd maybe get a little bit more of a welcoming reception, if you say, yes, I don't want to eat junk food too much anymore, or maybe I want to, quit smoking or quit drinking, whatever the case may be. It's when you continue down that path is that you do find a lot of people who are kind of striving for similar things, maybe not the exact same, same thing you are, but they're on the path, and kind of what Jocko Willink always says, if you're on the path, you can easily spot others who are on the path too. And those are usually the type of people you want to connect with because they know how hard it is just as much as what you're experiencing. And so they'd be more apt to help you and I guess be empathetic of what you're going through. So, and then also like when I was in Japan, I was offered sake by, a few Japanese folks there. And, I just respectfully declined, said that, I don't drink. It's just not who I am. And, I probably butchered it when I said it in Japanese, but they were pretty receptive of it. So I think ultimately, though, is just, when it comes to just like social situations, is just, you really kind of just got to stay true to who you are. And I think the biggest takeaway that I've kind of learned from that, and then also probably what I continue to learn as a podcaster, and probably you yourself, John, are probably experiencing as a podcaster as well, is that ultimately we're not going to please everybody. There's always going to be something that we're going to do, even if it's something good for us or for others. There's going to be some people out there that just simply aren't going to like it. So just obviously, be more open to the feedback of those who are, I guess, more accepting of you. And then, if you think you might need to reevaluate who might be in your life that could potentially hold you back, I mean, that's kind of up to you.
Yeah, man. It's a tricky thing. Some of the things you were mentioning there are it's not just about alcohol. Anytime you're making a change for the better in your life, making lifestyle decisions, it feels like that path to betterment, there is so much resistance there. And it's usually from those people that are already in your circle. And just by you becoming better, it makes them a little uneasy. Because then it's almost like, well, gosh, do I have to do that too? Like, it can get uncomfortable, and I think learning how to navigate that in a way that makes it about yourself becoming better and not about what other people are doing, I think it's an art, and I think that people can do it really well. And I think rising tides raises all ships, obviously.
Right.
But sometimes you just got to persevere, and like you said, find that community of people, even if it's outside of your current friend group. Find that community of people that's doing the same thing and connect with them and get advice from them and stick with them and continue to go there for encouragement. So there was so many good nuggets in there. I hope people go back and catch all of them. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet.
But so that was really good. Josh, I appreciate you coming on the show today. And once again, why don't you tell people where people can find you on social media or your website, the name of your podcast again, and I'll be linking everything in the show notes too.
Yeah, so again, my podcast is called the All Around Adventure Podcast. And I also do have a website, is just allaroundadventure.com. I actually just totally revamped my website, and I think it looks pretty good. So I'm, excited to hear maybe some feedback from anyone who goes and checks it out. You can find the podcast on there to listen to it directly on the website. It's also, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all those other, major podcasting platforms. And if you'd like to connect with me on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, just at All Around Adventure, just one word with no dashes there. And I'm on Twitter at All Around Advent. I couldn't quite fit the URE in the username because Twitter doesn't yet allow for a very long username. So just All Around Advent there. But, by all means, it's just, I'm here for, for my audience, it's just, if anyone has any thing that they'd like to hear on the podcast, I do guest shows as well as solo episodes. I mean, any way I could try to be of service to anyone out there and see how I could, add value in their lives, I'm willing to give it a shot. So by all means, feel free to reach out and connect. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot for having me. This is great.
All right.
Well, there you have it, everyone. My interview on the Joe Health Show podcast. I hope you all enjoyed that and you found it insightful. Now, usually this is the part where I say subscribe to my podcast, go connect with me on social media, leave me a rating, review, and so on and so forth. But this time around, I guess the only thing I'm really going to ask you to do is go support the Joe Health Show podcast. I really appreciate Jonathan welcoming me as a guest and allowing me to share my story and my own insights with his audience. So yeah, that's just what I'm going to ask you all to do today, is to go check out the Joe Health Show podcast, and I'll leave links to where you can find that, as well as Jonathan's social media accounts in the show notes for this episode. And I guess that's it. And that's all I have to say for now. And I'll be back on Wednesday with my Wisdom Wednesday segment, and also be back next Saturday with a brand new episode featuring another fantastic guest. So be sure to check back in. But until then, I'm Josh Guerrero saying be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.